Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, a Ukraine war news update. I'm actually going to cut off this video later. I'm redoing the beginning because it went on too long talking about American politics, so I've split this up between the Ukraine war geopolitical update and the American political system update, where I maintain that I think the US is at the moment in the throes of trying to commit political suicide. Anyway, over to Ursula von der Leyen to start with. Someone linked this to me. I can't remember who it was now. This is a really interesting, presentation, I guess, speech. It's a really interesting speech from Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, speaking to EU ambassadors, newly appointed EU ambassadors, I believe. And this is the beginning of her kind of next tenure, Ursula von der Leyen. Fascinating. The first, as you can see there, 3 quarters is talking about international trade and relationships and China and the US. Really strong, but considered and a bit outreachy actually to the US in terms of what she has to say in dealing with the US and the new Trump administration. Fascinating. And what's marked in her speech is the positive sum game approach that she sees the EU as having, which is a very different approach to the transactional America first. We only do things to the benefit of America. Anything else is just America has to gain. Whereas there's a subtle difference here with what Ursula von der Leyen says, which is we look for positive sum gains. Like the best result is a win-win situation for the people that we're working with, and that's that kind of alliance. But she sets out what the goals are for the EU. Security, prosperity, blah blah, for all the people within the EU. She says, right, those are our goals, and these are the ways we're going to go and achieve those. She's really well measured speech. This it is truly a good speech. And I was considering doing a whole reaction to the speech. It would have been too long and would have bored most of you, no doubt. But we're going to join it 3/4 of the way through, where she talks about really the main part of the speech. Okay, it comes this late on, but what's fascinating is this is what we're all about at the moment. And what we're all about, Ukraine.
Which brings me to one of my central points for today. The war in Ukraine remains the most central and consequential crisis for Europe's future. Russia's full-scale war will soon enter in its 4th year. Putin is trying harder than ever to win this war on the ground. His goal remains Ukraine's capitulation. And then we know what could happen next, because it has already happened before. He would move on to the next target, just like he did after 2008 and 2014. It is not only the destiny of Ukraine that is at stake. It's Europe's destiny. It is our first priority that we empower Ukraine's resistance. So far, our Union and member states have supported Ukraine to the tune of 134 billion euros. That is more than anybody else.
That's a very pointed statement, she said. That is more than anybody else.
And thanks to the Ukraine facility and the G7 loan, we have closed Ukraine's budgetary gap for the entire year of 2025. In parallel, we must speed up the immediate delivery of weapons and ammunition. And this will be at the heart of our work in the coming weeks.
So this is unbelievably important, right? With the US stepping back, potentially, you've got Ursula von der Leyen saying we must speed up the provision of weapons and ammunition. And in the coming weeks, this is going to be a focus. I mean, rhetoric, yes. Is it action? Don't know yet. But my goodness, that's what we want to hear at the very least.
No one wants peace more than the people of Ukraine. No one. But there's only one path to the just and lasting peace they are longing for. And this runs through military and financial strength for Ukraine, And at the same time, this is also the moment for maximum pressure on Russia.
Now, this, honestly, I can't tell you how good this is. Like, to hear someone talking about just and lasting peace, maximum pressure on Russia, military aid to Ukraine. And unfortunately, we've got Donald Trump saying, oh, it's terrible, lots of people dying on both sides, and faffing around with not really providing much substance to what he's saying. Just like, it needs to stop now. It needs to stop now. And then blaming Zelensky, he's not an angel, for standing up to the invaders of his country. And you're like, okay, that's absolutely crazy rhetoric. Here is someone that is totally sensible. Like, you can't fault what she's saying here. I'm sorry, you can't. And, all we hope is that this is then backed up with action. And the EU has been doing an awful lot, the European Peace Facility Fund and so on and so forth.
Its economy is struggling with high inflation and interest rates. Our 16th sanctions package is on its way. The phase out of Russian fossil fuels must continue. And it is incredibly important that member states extended the freeze of Russian assets. Now we can continue to put our minds to work on the most creative use of these assets to support Ukraine's fight for freedom.
Boom.
We must show to the Kremlin that the longer the war, the higher the price for Russia. Ukraine needs peace through strength. The people of Ukraine have resisted for so long because they want to be free and they want to be part of our union. And that is their aspiration, rightly so. And no one can take this away from them. It's a matter of justice.
And she mentioned peace through strength, not peace at any cost, peace as just as quickly as possible. Like, this is what the United States should be saying.
But it's also a matter of security, stability, and prosperity. This is a core interest for Ukraine and for all of Europe. And we will make it happen. And this is not only about Ukraine. In a world where size and weight matter, and where small countries can be blackmailed more easily, it is in our shared interest to unite the European family. So at the start of this new mandate, I want to be very clear. 2025 must be a year of progress for all those countries that are on their merits-based path for joining the European Union. Completing our union is in our core interest, and it will be the core priority in the 5 years ahead of us.
And so on and so forth. Just really positive and really good for Ukraine. I'm absolutely, I'm very happy that she's used Ukraine as the central driving stimulus for progressing the European Union. Now, I just saw this linked on the other video. I haven't watched this yet, but I forward wound it to where, so this is Kaja Kallas, the former Estonian premier, who is now in a prominent position in the EU. I forget her exact title. But here she talks about Ukraine.
This is the opposite of what I want to do. Dear ambassadors, no matter where in the world you are working or how far you are from Ukraine, it is important that we all understand what Russia's intentions really are here. While you are my top priority, Ukraine needs to be our top priority. Because Putin wants all of Ukraine, and it is not his to have. He's not concerned about NATO. If he was, he wouldn't be pulling his troops from the borders of NATO to fight in Ukraine.
Really, really good point there. That salient point about NATO expansionism, and that's the whole issue. Well, he's drawn them away from Finland, etc., etc. I really like this rhetoric again, which is very clear about, what Putin really wants and who he really is. And he wants all of Ukraine. And talking in very clear terms about the moral corruption inside the heart of Putin in a way that we do not hear from unfortunately, the present American administration. The moral and political clarity here is in stark contrast.
He's more concerned about the expansion of democracy and the values the EU stands for. The problem is that Russia is fighting against us a few hundred kilometers from our borders. Their missiles and drones have already crossed ours. We have to help to end this war. But for peace to endure in the way that Ukraine deserves, we must push Kremlin to change its goals. The only language they speak is strength. This is why I welcome the US commitment to peace through strength. Europe is already economically strong. The EU has the strength and the means to outspend and outproduce Russia. What we need is political will.
Yes.
And with our allies, we are even stronger. Our collective GDP with the UK, US and Canada is 25 times larger than that of Russia's. We must all be stronger on Russia, sanctioning those who help Russia keep its war machines running, blocking profits from oil and gas that directly support the state budget. Our sanctions are working. Russia's economy is struggling. We cannot loosen the grip now. We also have to be stronger for Ukraine. The EU is Ukraine's largest overall donor. We have contributed over 134 billion euros, including close to 50 billion in military aid. We cannot be doing less when we should be doing more. Where there's a will, there's a way. So I don't accept the argument that this or that has never been done before. I want us to find further financing solutions for Ukraine. The Ukrainians fight very bravely, and with our support at every step of the way. Russia is an existential threat to us all. So I don't want to hear what we can't do. I want to discuss and act on what we can do. We should be the architects of creative solutions, not foot soldiers along well-trodden paths. I want this to be guiding principle for this mandate, which brings me to working with those we can.
And so on and so forth, no doubt. Just brilliant. It's like, I don't want to hear what we can't do. Where there's a will, there's a way. We must finance them more. Ursula von der Leyen plus Kaja Kallas equals support for Ukraine. And I'm here for it. Absolutely here for it. So it's good to start off with a positive. Okay. Unfortunately, with that 16th set of sanctions that Ursula von der Leyen just referenced, 10 EU states supports travel restrictions on Russian, scare quotes, diplomats, spies, but Germany has opposed that, fearing retaliation from Moscow. So due to Berlin's resistance, the next sanctions package will not have the travel restrictions on those Russian, scare quotes, diplomats, which is a real shame. And I think Germany is being a little bit weak there. Next week, Ukraine and the US are set to continue high-level talks. Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Tiki confirmed that this week saw discussions, including the President's Office head Andriy Yermak's calls with US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Envoy Keith Kellogg. So that's good news. They are talking. Things are moving along. Although, remember, Zelensky did say, as I reported this morning, that the US doesn't have a plan for Ukraine. And that could be why Keith Kellogg is now not going to present a plan to the Munich Security Conference, because arguably they don't have one, at least not one that's workable yet. That old solve it in one day thing is just a complete joke. And I will keep saying that, because we must keep reminding ourselves that you can't just overtly lie ridiculously, although it appears that you bloody well can. 37 Ukrainian MPs are visiting the US to strengthen bilateral relations, says the speaker. 37 Ukrainian lawmakers have travelled to the US to strengthen ties with the US officials, according to Ruslan Stefanchuk, Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament. And I think this is testament to the worry, possibly, that Ukrainian lawmakers have with the incoming administration, that it is, there's no clarity there of messaging. We're hearing all sorts of different things when at times Trump will let things go, let things slip, like, Zelensky's no angel, and, he shouldn't have resisted the Russians when they attacked, etc., etc. We could have done a deal. In other words, as soon as you're attacked, you just give your country away to Russia and say, we'll do a deal. We're not going to defend our home. It's ridiculous. So, yeah, there are some mixed messages. But Edward Hunter Christie says, say what you will about the Kellogg uncertainty principle. At least it's moving in the right direction. Seriously, though, this is the first good sign out of Kellogg since the Trump inauguration. Now, what's he talking about? Well, on February the 1st, Keith Kellogg said that most democratic nations have elections in a time of war. I think it's important that they do so. So there was this criticism of Keith Kellogg that he was regurgitating Russian talking points in demanding that Ukraine have elections, even though it's constitutionally not appropriate. Well, on the 6th of February, so yesterday, he changed his tune and said, I think Ukrainians cannot hold elections because it is written in their constitution. They cannot hold elections until the hostilities cease. I'm going to say, I think this is a really good indication that people you expect to know a lot about stuff are put in important positions, like President of the United States, like envoy to Ukraine, don't know enough, right? We are in a luxurious position with regard to Ukraine in that we have put in the hard yards of you guys. Some of you listen to me like sometimes 5 hours a day, right? I am researching Ukraine 12 hours a day with 365 days a year. Literally don't have a day off, haven't had a day off for, I don't know, 2.5 years or something, right? What that means is I know quite a bit about Ukraine. I've done whole videos on how it's unconstitutional for them to hold the elections and all the arguments for and against elections. Keith Kellogg has a life where he has not been obsessed with Ukraine. So before he's made an envoy, he knew a bit about Russia and a bit about Ukraine in his kind of military career and his background knowledge. But he wouldn't have been sitting at a desk 12 hours a day, scouring the internet and learning as much as he could about Ukraine. He hasn't visited Ukraine. I don't think I don't think he has. Anyway, you get my point. So even someone with what you might think it has got the requisite knowledge to do that job doesn't know enough about Ukraine, to the point where I think he just heard the idea that, oh, they haven't had an election, they should have an election. Doesn't know that the UK didn't have an election for 9 years during World War II. Doesn't know that it's not that it's written in Ukraine's constitution, and doesn't understand the arguments for and against having an election in wartime. Safety, the fact that your troops need to vote and they're all over the shop, the fact that you've got diaspora communities that have fled Ukraine and they're all over the place, etc., etc. All these complications that can be overcome, but it's just really freaking difficult and also can be quite dangerous and is open to influence from Russia very, very easily, and costing a lot of money. And it will also divert attention from people campaigning that should be trying to run a country in wartime, etc., etc. So I've been through all of these arguments before, but when you've got an envoy coming along and kind of sounding off and also regurgitating Russian talking points, it's a problem. But it does, I think, reflect a lack of knowledge. Simply put, I don't think Keith Kellogg knew enough about the subject to cast that opinion. In the same way that, and this isn't so much a criticism. I kind of understand that Donald Trump won't know enough about Ukraine because he doesn't have the time to do. Like, this is literally my job, is to learn about Ukraine and disseminate that information to the wider world, right? Donald Trump's job is far wider than that, and he's got to do an awful lot of stuff, and he doesn't read, and all these things, and he unfortunately has people around him who will lie to him about Ukraine. And so he will not have the requisite knowledge to cast sensible opinions about Ukraine. It's just simply the fact. He doesn't know enough about Ukraine to really be the one making big decisions about Ukraine. He needs advisors to help him do that. The problem is most of his advisors are terrible on Ukraine, such as, we'll come on to Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump Jr., these adjacent people, and then people in these concentric circles are even closer. he does have Keith Kellogg, but again, how much does Keith Kellogg know? He'll be learning at the moment, but you can see he's learning because he's done an about face in 5 days there. However, the Kyiv Independent reports healthy democracies can hold elections in wartime, according to Keith Kellogg. You're going to reach a point where they're going to have elections. That doesn't mean Zelensky should leave, Trump Special Envoy Keith Kellogg has said. So again, and that's from today. So you've got various opinions that he's touting at the moment. Trump is ready to tighten sanctions on Russia to end the war in Ukraine, as the impact is now just 3 out of 10, says Envoy Keith Kellogg. Ukraine also is to hold its first meeting with Kellogg. Now, this is really good news. If he is going to be strong on sanctions against Russia, this is music to my ears. I think this is even more important than military aid. I think Ukraine can survive without US military aid if the EU really steps up and other allies really step up, and money can buy US aid as well, and rare earth metals or whatever other situation. I think aid can still come from the US, but it probably won't be Presidential Drawdown Authority or USAID money, right? But Ukraine cannot prevail if they stop sanctions. It needs US. The US is the most important component of continued sanctions against Ukraine, along with the EU. But against Russia. So to hear this from Keith Kellogg is music to my ears. Now, due to US sanctions, Russia is on the verge of a serious oil transportation crisis. Sanctions have hit the shadow fleet, according to Bloomberg. The cost of renting tankers to deliver Russian Urals oil to Asia has increased by almost 50%. And there's a graph here that shows the US has imposed sanctions against an unprecedented number of Russian oil tankers, which I've shown you a similar one to this before, with the US tankers in blue, the I think it's EU in green, and it might be the UK in pink. But they are really stepping up, the Americans, or have been. That was prior to Trump taking over. I hope that really, really continues. And now we hear, this is Evgen Istrabin saying, after a series of successful Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries and a shutdown of 3 plants, the wholesale price of gasoline has increased by 20 to 22% and continues to grow. The growth is taking place against the backdrop of a reduction in volumes, which indicates a fuel shortage. And Jankiv adds, even against a backdrop of a 2-week minus 10% slide in global oil prices, Russian gasoline prices saw 17% in that time. As Ukraine can now destroy any refinery within 1,300 kilometers, the majority of their refineries, things are about to get very interesting. Silly Russians are about to learn. This is all looking quite good for Ukraine and bad for Russia. Okay, now, unfortunately, we're going to move on to USAID and, to disinformation. And this is a video that Elon Musk shared, a fake video claiming that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, paid celebrities for trips to Ukraine, shared by Elon Musk, and I reported this yesterday, garners over 13 million views in record success for Kremlin-backed disinformation campaign. So the Insider has written a piece on this. Fake video about USAID shutdown, shared by Elon Musk, garners over 13 million views, etc., etc. How Elon Musk boosted false USAID conspiracy theories to shut down the global development, agency. That's from CNBC. So it is a really sad state of affairs when the most powerful, richest man in the world that controls a massive megaphone is spreading disinformation as widely as he does. Now, how do you fight this? Well, one way of fighting it is with memes and humour. There are so many of these kicking around at the moment. This idea that USAID is paying all this money for people to help Zelensky or to visit Zelensky or whatever is now causing some fairly hilarious reactions. Zelensky visiting ancient Greece. The USAID paid $1 trillion for the trip. And you've got USAID paid $234 million to embed Zelensky together with Han Solo in carbonite. And so on and so forth. There's just all sorts of different ones. Freddie Mercury has paid $300 million by USAID to perform with Zelensky. Just on and on these ones go. So I guess that's one way of dealing with it. And the disinformation is just flying around. Just in terms of American politics, you've got Ryan Fournier. If you want to know who Ryan Fournier is, he's a co-founder of Students for Trump, arrested for physically abusing his girlfriend. You can go and read that all there. He's not a nice human being, but anyway, he's a massive in the kind of Elon Musk ecosystem. Just says, why did Representative Jasmine Crockett, so she's a representative, a lawmaker for Texas for the Democrats, why did she send over $500,000 in campaign payments to her husband for security services? You would think as a husband you would do that for free. And then readers add as a community notes, Representative Jasmine Crockett has never been married. The Post presents an unverified claim as a fact. I mean, luckily he has taken that down now, but we need to be really careful. Disinformation is flying around at a rate of knots, and people can lie. And that the problem is you're being given an example from the leader of your country in America. If Trump can say, I am going to solve the Ukraine war within one day, even before the inauguration, then you are giving permission to anyone to just say whatever they like. And I think that is a precursor for some very, very dangerous times. Now, talking about disinformation and talking about those concentric circles, you've got Tucker Carlson, and as mentioned, Donald Trump Jr. and Steve Bannon, and these other people who are not officially in the US administration, but are informing opinions in the administration. And indeed, as you can see here, Tucker Carlson is going into the White House to meet with, no doubt, Donald Trump. So Kremlin propagandist Tucker Carlson was spotted entering the White House earlier today. Is there any help? Is he there to help them craft their Ukraine peace deal? And when you hear him talk about how Zelensky's a dictator, pushing back on Piers Morgan then pushed back on Tucker Carlson, but only after the interview. Sadly, he didn't challenge him enough at the time of the interview. And, I think this is a really good point. Things Tucker Carlson didn't ask Putin about. So when Tucker Carlson interviewed Putin, the 400 Ukrainian bodies found in Izium in mass graves after Russian occupation. I was in Borodyanka recently, and Irpin and Bucha, and 640 bodies that were found in Bucha. And also there's a commemoration board to all the people that haven't been found yet in Bucha, in the Bucha genocidal massacre. So, these Egypts who are anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia that are sitting around the Trump administration, feeding thoughts and opinions through osmosis to those in charge, I think are incredibly dangerous. And here's a very good example of how they are such. And the other one, as I keep mentioning, is Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon, remember, is someone whose methodology the Trump administration have taken wholesale. So the Project 2025 blueprint or set of objectives is being delivered through the muzzle velocity fire hose of crap that the Trump administration have taken from Bannon. That's Bannon's plan. You need to hit the media with all these different things every single day, so the media cannot concentrate enough on any one of them, and it allows so much stuff to get through. And that's what's going on at the moment. Steve Bannon here is terrible on Ukraine.
Well, you and I don't agree about Ukraine, to put it mildly. I mean,
I know.
And I'm actually a genuine question. I don't want to get into a whole thing about Ukraine.
You're just wrong, but Piers, you're just wrong about Ukraine.
No,
unfortunately, I've been right. What?
I'm not.
Piers, you're 1,000% wrong.
So Steve Bannon thinks that Piers Morgan, who's actually, I disagree with Piers Morgan on an awful lot, but he's fairly good on Ukraine. And that's absolutely right, and as he should be. Steve Bannon says you're not only wrong about Ukraine, you're 1,000% wrong. Steve Bannon is anti-Ukraine. And he is at the heart of what the American administration is doing presently. This is why I keep talking about the tension between Keith Kellogg and Mike Walls and maybe Marco Rubio to a degree, and then these people like Steve Bannon and so on and so forth. Right. Okay, thanks for watching that. I'm going to cut it off here. Well, I do actually go on to talk about American politics and refer back to some of this video, but I'm slicing it into two just so it's a little bit more manageable for the viewer. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.